All right. So, welcome to our Lunch and Learn, everyone. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT. And today, for our Lunch and Learn, we're going to be talking about protective buffers and setbacks. We have two guests with us today. First, we have Andrew Woomer. He goes by he, they, and he is an advocacy coordinator for the Clean Air Council, and he works on the Protective Buffers PA Coalition to push the increase of statewide setbacks for oil and gas industry. He and his wife and his cat named Scout spend most of their free time in the garden. So thank you for joining us, Andrew. And we also have Jim or James Cirilano. He is our community advocate here at Protect PT, and he's a graduate of Duquesne University School of Law. He enjoys hiking, rock climbing, and cooking. And thanks so much for joining us today, Jim. And so we're going to be going over today, teaching everyone about what we here at Protect BT, along with Clean Air Council and several other organizations throughout the state, have been working on for, I think, Andrew, I think the other day we talked about it for like 2 years, right?
Yeah, I think like January of 2020 might have been our first meeting. So it's been a while.
Yeah, right. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is protective buffers, what does it mean, what do setbacks mean, and kind of go over why we as organizations have been really working to push this particular protective type situation for oil and gas development. I will say, just kind of preface this with, this is new oil and gas development. This would not pertain to anything that's currently permitted. And then Jim is going to go over with you some efforts that we at Protect BT have been doing, and that kind of how we'll talk about how that ties into the state level work that we've been doing for the past couple of years. So, Andrew, let's maybe start out by talking about why it's so important to keep shale gas away from people. Let's just start with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main reason that we want to keep shale gas away from people and increase the distances that this infrastructure can be built is for health, right? Health risks that come along with this infrastructure. Um, the substances and chemicals emitted into the air from shale gas infrastructure are especially dangerous to children with developing, respiratory, immune, and nervous systems. Can really impact them long term. Elderly folks and people who already have lung and heart conditions are particularly impacted by pollution from these infrastructure projects. And that's the Clean Air Council tends to focus on air stuff, but there's also a lot of water concerns too, right? So hydraulic fracturing, like fracking, um, pollutes wells and waterways, and the wastewater from that process is often radioactive and contaminated with all kinds of scary chemicals. So it really shouldn't be near people. And as you can see from the picture that we have here, taken by Kelly Finan, there are wells and infrastructure this close to children, right? You can see a well being flared while they're playing at recess at school. And that's just too close, right? For, I think, everybody's comfort.
Yeah, for sure, Andrew. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I started getting involved in this subject in the first place, because there is a well pad that's proposed less than a half mile from my home. And actually, there are four well pads in Level Green, which is like the town right adjacent to mine, where there are four well pads proposed within a mile of a school, which to me seems pretty crazy when you think about how many children are going to that school. So that's actually why I started getting involved, because these pads we're seeing them so much closer to people, and in more densely populated areas. So, we've seen, I guess, maybe let's take a step back and talk a little bit about what we've seen in the past. And, some of the things like in this picture, we can talk about, how there are folks in Washington County that have been dealing with, in Greene County that have been dealing with fracking, for the last decade. There are folks in Susquehanna County. And so while throughout the shale play, there have been lots and lots of studies that have been done, right, on why fracking is harmful to human health. We talk a little bit about that, don't we, Andrew? There's a resource on the webpage, and it's part of the work that we did, correct?
Yeah, so the Protective Buffers Pennsylvania website has our recommendations for particular pieces of infrastructure and the setbacks that we would like to see for those pieces of infrastructure. And it's all based on, the most up-to-date peer-reviewed research that we can find. And, uh, the the standards that we would like to see are well ahead of what currently exists. So, I mean, do we want to talk about what the current setback distances are?
Yeah, why don't you just go dive right in and talk about that?
Yeah, so the current setback distances for the state of Pennsylvania are laid out in Title 58. So if we have any people who really like to read through policy and things like that, just Google Title 58 Pennsylvania oil and gas, and it'll come up with some different regulations around oil and gas infrastructure. And as it stands, fracking wells, so unconventional wells, can be drilled as close as 500 feet from an occupied building or 1,000 feet from a drinking water source. And these distances can be waived by property owners, right? So if someone is fine with something being closer and it's on their property, they can just waive that. And I think that applies. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that applies it's if it's on your property and it's closer than 500 feet to someone else's occupied building, that's still a-okay, right? If the property owner waives that. And unconventional wells can also be drilled within 300 feet of a wetland, as long as it's bigger than an acre. And it's been causing lots of problems. The Pennsylvania grand jury spent 2 years studying the effects of fracking. And in 2020, they released a report about it and their recommendations. And they determined that the uh, Department of Environmental Protection has been failing to protect public health, and they have, suggested more increased setbacks. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. So the increased setbacks that we talk about in the protective buffers campaign, that is what that goes along with the recommendation of the AG's office, correct, Andrew?
So the AG's office is recommending 2,500 feet, which is 5 times the distance of what we have now,
Mhm.
and we think that's great. Our recommendation is actually almost 3,300 feet, just because we've found some studies that indicate that there are still measurable health impacts at that, at about that distance. But we're pretty thrilled that 2,500 feet has been, talked about by 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 people. It's not perfect, but it is like a great step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. And so we were canvassing actually our neighborhood on Saturday because we were talking to folks about the well pads that are proposed in our area, and I just remember the flyer saying well pads do not make good neighbors, and this is totally true. So from a health impact, from perspective, there are lots of studies that show that there's an increased risk. In fact, there's just this new Yale study that just came out, and that Yale study talks about how children that live within, I think it's 1.25 miles of well pads, are twice as likely to get childhood leukemia, which is pretty scary if you think about if you're a parent and you're living within that 1.25 miles, which many of us are. We are living within that 1.25 miles. So it seems like the science keeps updating, and the more we're finding out about well pads, about pigging stations, about compressor stations, about What am I missing? Like valving stations, pigging stations. Like there's just like so much. When we say infrastructure, there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this whole system that takes gas out of the ground and ships it either to ports for export, which a lot of folks don't know that some of this gas is being exported, not only exported to other countries for gas, but also exported to make plastics. So that's a big problem. And then the people that actually live in the communities are basically in the sacrifice zone. So Andrew, would you say it's fair to say that we're just asking for that sacrifice zone to for the distance to be further away from people? And that's like one of the key things we're asking for.
Yeah, I mean, we just want this stuff to be further away from us, and I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, we have, I didn't personally go through all of these studies because that's not my my role, but in our recommendations, we suggest setbacks not just for unconventional wells, but for compressor stations, for cracker plants, which you mentioned the use of natural gas for the making of plastic, and that's what a cracker plant is. And there's one being built in Beaver County. I think that's about to come online soon.
Yeah,
Um,
I think is that our next image?
I believe.
Let me, yeah, okay. So that's not our, so this is crazy. This is a well pad actually near our office and in our community. Thank you, Ted from Frack Tracker, for taking this picture. This is the Gaia well pad. This was actually on the cover of the PA medical compendium that came out this year, which I think is really interesting. But if you go to the next screen, I think that is okay, so this is what you're talking about. So for folks that don't know what a cracker is, Andrew, will you just kind of talk a little bit about it's not a biscuit that you eat.
No, it's not a biscuit that you eat. So this is the cracker plant being built, I think, in Potter Township, in Beaver County, and you can see how close it is to the river there. And I don't think you can tell in the picture, but there's like a shopping mall and a housing development, like just right, nearby. You can go, you can hit up Boscov's and then, drive right to the edge of a cul-de-sac and stare down at this giant industrial facility here. Um, and what's going to be happening at this facility is natural gas is going to be pipelined in through, I want to say, more than three different pipelines. I think there's 3 to 5. I wouldn't quote me on that, but um, and it takes that natural gas and turns it into polyethylene, which you then use to turn into plastic pellets that they call nurdles that they're going to use to make single-use plastics. So they're going to be trucking these very tiny, I can't, trying to get my fingers on camera, very tiny little plastic BBs essentially, and it's not good. That plastic's going to get places. Plastic holds on to toxins. It's right near our water sources. There's a lot of problems at other cracker plants that already exist down in the Gulf, and now we have one a lot closer to home.
Yeah.
So
And actually, it's funny that you were holding up that little. So those are actually called nurdles, and Emma is our tech on the back end here. Thank you, Emma, for your tech support. And so, Emma, if you wouldn't mind just pulling up a link and sticking it in the chat here for us. We actually had our last Lunch and Learn. We were learning all about nurdles, and there are actually nurdles that are being produced right now from the cracker plant that they're finding in our waterways. So if you go to our Lunch and Learn, if you missed last month's Lunch and Learn, it was all about nurdles. So again, I don't know if Boscov's is still around, Andrew, but you certainly wouldn't want to go shopping and breathe that air, or be out playing as a kid. we talk about a lot here in Pittsburgh. And for folks that don't live here in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of conversations that we have internally about, and with our elected officials about childhood asthma, childhood cancers. And so you can see that there's a reason why this stuff is happening here. And one of the reasons why is because we have such a huge amount of industry. It is part of our, I think, our history here in Pittsburgh of having extraction, right? Coal, steel making, coke, and all of those things. But still, we see that this is still happening. And as we talk about things like clean energy, there was a clean energy ministerial here last week, and we talk about transitioning to clean energy. This is certainly not the way to do it, particularly if you want to help keep humans healthy, right? Especially the kids. Yes. So, Andrew, do you have anything else to add? Is there anything that we forgot to talk about with really the statewide campaign? And maybe tell me a little bit about this photo.
Yeah, so this photo here is from the Pine Creek watershed in kind of like north central Pennsylvania. It's a fracking waste disposal area. I think they try to kind of recycle or treat fracking wastewater at this facility. And you can see, well, you can't see my cursor, but kind of the upper right hand corner. There's a home. There's a housing development kind of on the top left hand corner. And like I mentioned earlier, this wastewater is often radioactive. There's a story came out. Was it Justin Noble
Mm-hmm.
who put that out, where he was interviewing um, people who truckers who would be carrying this wastewater and weren't informed that it was radioactive. Um, it wasn't being labeled as radioactive, so it was traveling through communities, and they're getting, different kinds of cancers and not really being compensated or treating well based on that. And it just kind of goes to show how a lot of these industries treat communities and people, right? They come in, they take what they want, they leave us with the mess. It hurts our health, our children's health, and we're kind of left to deal with it while they are laughing all the way to the bank. So kind of back to setbacks specifically, there is a House bill that got introduced last fall. So there is some progress on this at the state level. Representative Danielle Friel-Otten, she represents folks out east, introduced House Bill 1465. And we're really excited that she kind of stuck her neck out on this and are pushing for increased setbacks. Her bill would increase the distances to the 2,500 feet that are recommended by the grand jury for fracking wells. And so that'd be the distance from like a fracking well to an occupied building or a water source. She wants to see 5,000-foot setbacks from schools and hospitals and high occupancy buildings for compressor stations and wastewater pits. So facilities like the ones that we're seeing up on the screen now would now need to be 5,000 feet away if this got signed into law. And obviously this bill would like increase protection, right, for Pennsylvania residents and their health. So we're excited to support the bill. We're excited to get the word out about it and really want to see it be a success. We're going to keep pushing for the distances that kind of can be justified by peer-reviewed research. But this is a great step in the right direction. So
Yeah.
I guess what you can do about that is, call your rep, pester them, right? Send them an email, write them a letter, grab a cup of coffee with them, and let them know that you want them to support House Bill 1465. I know we have a petition so that if you don't want to make all those calls and go through all that effort, you can just sign our petition and get your name added to the many, many other Pennsylvania residents who have signed on.
And that petition's on the Protective Buffers website, correct, Andrew?
Yeah, and I think we have another link to it as well that Emma can drop, but it's on the Protective Buffers website, protectivebufferspa.org/action.
Nice. Yep. And I'm going to put the protective buffers on here again. And you said it's /action. Okay. So I'm going to go to the take action page, which I think is what it's on, the take action. And I'll put that in the chat as well. That way folks can see that one too. All right. And I'll put it up here at the top of the screen. Maybe I can make it a little bit bigger for everybody. Yeah, it's one nice thing about this program. I can make it nice and big. Okay, so talk to your legislators, it sounds like, are things that people can do. People can sign the petition. That's another thing they can do. Let's talk a little bit about what we can do locally, because Jim has been working really diligently for the past several months on a local ordinance. And so first, Jim, maybe we could talk, and I'm going to unmute you. Maybe we can talk just kind of, if you could tell people, what is an ordinance? That way people kind of have an idea of what it is and why they should talk to their local officials about the ordinance.
Sure. So ordinances are local laws that control pretty much everything that occurs in a municipality or a township or whatever your particular small entity of government is called. And ordinances control what goes on in the very smallest, most local areas of governance. So a municipality, for instance, is the smallest unit of government in the state of Pennsylvania, along with a township or a borough. They're all just different names for that smallest unit of government. And what the ordinances do is they tell people in that municipality or in that borough or in that township where they can build their houses, how many residences can be in a single building, whether it's a multi-unit dwelling house or a single family home. It says where you can open a business, operate a gas station. Basically, it tells you what you can do and where you're permitted to do it. And so all ordinances have zoning. And zones are things like business zones, residential zones, multi-dwelling unit zones, single-family home zones, industrial zones, agricultural zones. They're all called different things, but they're all pretty much controlling the same thing, and that is where you could put a particular thing.
Right.
Now, we've been talking about well pads during this discussion, and well pads are what would be considered a heavy industrial activity. And heavy industrial activities have activities on them such as drilling, heavy equipment, very large structures that are engaged in either manufacturing something, extracting something, building something very large and very heavy. And those are generally kept in their own particular spot in a zoning scheme. So in other words, most folks don't want to have a steel mill next to their home or next to their school or next to the hospital, because steel mills are very big, they're very noisy, they engage in a lot of activities that involve chemicals and heat, and they spew smoke and other pollutants, and people don't, generally speaking, want to live next to them. So in a zoning plan, those are kept farther away, or as far away as possible, from places like residential dwellings or hospitals or schools or nursing homes, those sorts of things. And oil and gas drilling is a heavy industrial activity. And the reason why it's classified as such is because it uses very, very large equipment to drill a mile underground and oftentimes more. And then it uses drilling equipment that will drill laterally, that is, horizontally under the ground, a mile deep, for another mile or two, or depending on the formation of rock or what the drillers are looking for,
Mm-hmm.
for a particular distance. That drilling is very noisy. That drilling involves the use of a lot of chemicals that are pumped into the ground that are oftentimes very toxic to human beings. In fact, one of the chemicals a class of the chemicals that are being used in fracking in a lot of places are called PFAS, PFAS, and PFOS, PFOS. And they are widely considered to be what's called forever chemicals. In other words, they never break down. They're in the environment forever. And they are highly toxic to human beings. There are increases in cancer, there are increases in immunodeficiencies, there are increases in birth defects. There are a lot of things that are associated with these particular chemicals.
Yeah.
And most people don't want them near their home or their school or their hospital.
Yeah.
And so that is the first line of defense against having one of these structures placed next to your home, is how it's zoned. The other things that occur in well drilling are there's an increased level of truck traffic. These are very, very large trucks, multi-axle dump trucks. They haul dirt away, they haul water away, they haul water into the area. There are large towers that contain very, very bright lights, because the fracking operation is taking place 24 hours a day. It can't stop. They have to do the fracking operation continuously until it's done. So it has to be done in the middle of the night. And very often these lights cause light pollution that spill into people's homes, are disruptive to their sleep, are disruptive to all of their activities of daily living.
Right.
Also,
Sorry, Jim.
sure.
Emma, really quickly, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide. Thank you. Okay. And again, this in the background is this is the Gaia well site that Ted took a picture of. And it actually looks much different now. This is kind of what Jim was describing, right? Jim, you were describing all the heavy industrial activity. You can see sound walls here that are up around the pad. That's to try to dampen the sound a little bit. And then you can also see some of the things that you were describing, right? You were describing the tower and the lights and all of the equipment and everything on the pad. This is the same pad that's in that earlier picture that was across from the cemetery. But this is just another view of the pad. So Jim, I think that what might be helpful is, can you tell me a little bit about how you have been working on, kind of adding some protections to the Penn Township Ordinance, and what kind of common sense protections you've looked into, and I think we talked a little bit about why this is a heavy industrial process, but tell me a little bit about what the current Penn Township Ordinance says, and I think if we go to the next screen, we can talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Cool.
So as Andrew had pointed out, the state regulation is very permissive in terms of where these well pads can be built, what kind of precautions must be undertaken by the drillers to protect the people and the communities in which these well pads are being placed. And basically, it is a very bare bones sort of statute, that is the law of Pennsylvania, when it comes to regulating the drilling operations and the extraction operations for this methane gas. So what we have decided to do is to increase the protections at the local level. That is by way of ordinance. So if the state isn't going to do that, if the state isn't going to engage in protecting its residents, that is us, then we have decided that we would try to do that for ourselves.
Right. And
And so
oh, sorry, really quick. I have a question for you. So we're allowed to do that, right? A municipality is allowed to have more strict protections than the state, right?
that is correct. That
Okay.
is correct. That wasn't originally the case. The law had been written to say that nobody else but the state can regulate the oil and gas industries because the state was very enthusiastic and really wanted to extract as much gas as it could. There was a Supreme Court of Pennsylvania case, however, that ruled that because of what we call the Environmental Rights Amendment, uh, it permits uh, municipalities, townships, boroughs, etc., to regulate the introduction of well pads into their community.
Nice. Right on.
Yes, it is. It's great. It was a great decision. It's called Robinson Township
Nice. Yeah.
decision.
So people can look that up and, dig into that a little bit more, deeply if they want to. I know from a lawyer perspective, it's like, there's a lot to read into the law but I feel like these are really like kind of common sense protections that are not currently in the ordinance. So the ordinance, it says 600 feet. So that kind of goes to the question of, can it be more protective? So you just answered, yes, it can be more protective. And in this case, Penn Township has added a whopping 100 feet to the state ordinance. But that also, as Andrew mentioned, there are other different types of infrastructure that maybe that are not addressed in the Penn Township ordinance. So tell me a little bit about why this is problematic a little bit, and then we can kind of go to the next screen after that, and what we're proposing, right? Go ahead.
So currently, as Jillian pointed out, the Penn Township ordinance permits gas wells to be within 600 feet of homes, churches, schools. Those are called protected structures. And a protected structure is any building that has people in it for any particular length of time on a regular basis. It also permits these things to be drilled within 300 feet of streams, lakes, or wetlands. Uh, it doesn't provide for any kind of planning regarding where these well pads can go and what other sorts of infrastructure needs to be built and where it can be built in order to service these well pads, such as pipelines, pigging stations. A pigging station is just a place where there's another heavy industrial activity used to clean out the pipelines. How to get rid of the water that comes out of the ground, which is called produced water. Whenever there's a well drilled, water comes back out. It's often filled with toxic chemicals, and it's often radioactive. And like as we pointed out earlier, these are very noisy operations. They're filled with light. They're filled with fumes and smoke, vibrations, and none of those things are really addressed in the current Penn Township ordinance or in a lot of other ordinances that are currently in place around local municipalities. And frankly, when this whole fracking boom started, nobody was ready for it. Nobody really understood the extent of the activity that was going to take place or how toxic and how dangerous it really was. So much of this stuff has already happened. And once people began to see how bad it was to have that happening next to your house or in your neighborhood, they began to push back against allowing it to be there. So we have proposed some changes for the Penn Township ordinance, and that's on the next slide, I think.
Yeah. These are great changes. So I will say, so we had talked before about what is, what the state has said, what the attorney general has come out with as far as like what they would like to see. And so we're trying to try to find a kind of a happy medium. Obviously, we would like it to be more protective than this as far as like the setback is concerned, but maybe talk a little bit about, the the bullet points up here and why these protections are a good idea for Penn Township, at least, because every municipality is a little different. So it's not kind of a one size fits all situation. But for our situation, you took a lot of time into researching the community, as well as other things that had been proposed in other communities that are similar to ours. And there is some codified law, right, that already has some of these protections. So can you talk a little bit about that, Jim?
Sure. So this is this podcast, or this lunch and learn, is really about setbacks, and so we focused first on how far away a well pad must be from a protected structure. A protected structure, as I said before, is a building that houses people, on a regular basis. So that's houses, schools, hospitals, nursing homes, etc. And when we wrote the ordinance, we set out 2,500 feet, which at that time was the consensus scientific distance for setbacks that was considered to be the minimum that would be healthy. That has since expanded somewhat, and the science is now showing that it should be even further, but that's where we are currently. So we're at 2,500 feet. Now, as I said before, there are a lot of things that are associated with well pads and extraction of gas, methane gas from the ground, that are separate and necessary for the development of these kinds of pads. And those are pipelines, those are disposal of water, disposal of waste products. And so what we've asked for that the oil and gas companies do, if they are going to apply for a permit to have one of these wells, is to tell us what they're going to do over the next 10 years. For instance, are you going to put a pipeline in? How are you going to get the gas from the well to where it needs to go so it can be used? What are you going to do with the waste products? What are you going to do with the debris from the drilling? All of these things, they are required under the new ordinance to tell us, to disclose what their plans are, so that we know whether or not this is something that would be beneficial to the community, or whether it would be, harmful.
Yeah.
We are asking also for bonding in the minimum of $25 million for insurance, and also for closing up the operation. So there are two kinds of insurances. There's a bond that is a performance bond, and a performance bond means we're going to buy a policy of insurance that says we have this money in reserve, so that when needed, if we as a company go out of business, this money is there to close up this well pad. Because once you open a well pad, okay, it needs to be closed. You can't just walk away from it. And very often, these are stock companies. Very often, these are private businesses, but they keep the capitalization of that is the money on hand that they have to a minimum. They want to take out as much profit as they can. So when the end of the road comes, they would prefer to simply be able to walk away. And then if they do that, the burden falls on the local taxpayers to pay to clean up that well, to cap that well, and to clean up the destruction or the alterations of that 2 or 3 acre parcel of property, so that it's not a brownfield. The second part of insurance is liability insurance, and accidents happen at all levels of society, and they happen on a larger scale at industrial facilities, because everything in an industrial facility is on a larger scale. And so what we're asking is for adequate insurance, so that if the well blows up, so that if a radioactive spill occurs, so that if toxic water is released onto the ground or into the water system, that there is an adequate fund to clean up that accident. We're also asking for specific fines and penalties to be imposed on these operations in the event that they violate the ordinance, or in the event that they violate any of the statutes that are regulating them. Currently, the Penn Township ordinance doesn't have a provision for fines or penalties. Now, it's one thing to break the law, and everybody should obey the law, and they should not they should operate within the law. However, what we do as a society is we impose penalties for people who do break the law. And for instance, if you're caught speeding, you pay a fine, and you sometimes will lose your license if you speed too fast or too many times.
Yeah.
Likewise, if you commit a crime like breaking into a store and stealing stuff, you're penalized by going to prison. There are no penalties for these oil and gas companies under the current ordinance when they violate the ordinance. So what we're asking is that there is a penalty to be imposed for each and every time that they break a law, and every time that they break them, the penalties are increased.
Right.
That's another one of the incentives we feel for keeping these operations operating within the law.
Right. And so so it sounds like, just to kind of sum up, and we do have a question in the chat which I want to address. Thank you for putting that question in. So it sounds like these type of protections not only will protect the people, but also from the operations as they are now, but it will also protect people in the future from having to pay taxes and cleanups for discarded and out of date infrastructure. And so this sometimes is infrastructure that will be in place. We have gas wells here in Penn Township that are 100 years old, and they're leaking, and nobody's taking responsibility. So it sounds like this type of ordinance not only will put the burden of the operation and not harming the people by putting it further from people, but also help the municipality deal with some of those other issues. I have a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if we can answer this, Jim, but we can try. The question is, can people who signed and now have fracking or fossil fuel infrastructure on their property still dispute if oil and gas infrastructure violates the buffer and is too close to where people live and work? I think that's an interesting question.
Well, that's not an easy answer to give, and it depends on the person's specific circumstances. Oftentimes, when people give up leases to oil and gas companies to enable them to extract methane from underneath their real estate, they also oftentimes sign waivers, they sign releases, and things of that nature. So I would suggest that if that person does have a question, that they contact an attorney
Yes.
of their choice, and then bring those papers, all the things that they have with them, to the attorney so that it can be evaluated. So the answer really is the person may have the ability to restrict what the oil and gas company does, but it's on a case-by-case basis, and it all depends on what they've signed and what they may have been given in return.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the tough thing, about signing, agreements. We always suggest, if people come to us and say, hey, should I sign this? We always say, you need to talk to an attorney. And have the attorney go over it first before signing anything. So definitely, I think that's great advice. From a community perspective, Jim, that definitely take it to an attorney. There are several really good attorneys here in Pittsburgh. If you're not in Pittsburgh, we could offer a few suggestions of folks. I think that folks at the Clean Air Council also have a few attorneys. I'm not sure if that's something that you all do as well, but certainly there are several resources that we could connect you with to see, because the language, in my opinion, is made like super legal ease for a reason. So people like me cannot understand what's in that document. It's like unnecessarily hard to like figure out what's in that document. So it's not always easy to know what you're signing, right, when you're signing something. But I would say too that I feel like people that did sign some type of lease, but are now thinking about, how is this impacting me, really still have a voice, right? Because there's lots of other ways that you could use your voice. You could talk to the DEP, and you certainly could let them know that this is impacting you. And again, depending on where the permit is the process of where that permit is with a DEP. If there's future development that's proposed, more drilling that's proposed on that one particular pad, you could write letters to the DEP and say, hey, this is too close to my house. I originally signed, but like I'm regretting it, and I don't want this near my house anymore. And so I don't know how far you'd get with the DEP, but I feel like certainly you're an impacted person that is a property owner, and you have the right to tell the DEP how you feel about what's on your property. And they should take that into account. I remember, so we just made comments around the Draculic well site, which is less than a half mile from my home. And there were comments made by the oil and gas industry that is responsible for that pad. And one of the comments was, well, you're not a property owner that has the pad on your property, so therefore you have no right to say whether this could or could not happen. And whether I wholeheartedly dispute that. I feel like anybody that's close enough to be impacted does have a right to say whether it's permitted or not. What they're saying there is that if you do have it on your property, then you do have a right. So definitely contacting the oil and gas operator too, and let them know that they're impacting you. I would say that could be another thing you could do. And there's lots of things that you could do. You could contact your local reps. And I feel like people that, are in this position have a lot more power than maybe they think. So definitely, contact us if you have any more questions. But I think that's a great question, and it's nuanced, like Jim said. It's kind of on an individual basis. But I appreciate the questions, and we definitely have several people watching right now. So if others are watching and have more questions, please put them up in the chat, and we're going to keep going forward with our presentation here for the time that we have left, which is, we have about, 15 minutes. We probably won't take a whole 15 minutes to wrap up our talk today. But, Jim, let's talk a little bit about, now that we talked about why it's a really good idea to update the ordinance at the local level, because the state level is there's efforts there at the state level. That's really wonderful. If we could have the state setback be higher, we're working towards that as well. But this is something we can do right now, right? That takes less time, that takes less effort than the state. And number two, that the state should be the floor and the local municipality could be the ceiling, right? We could always do better than the state. So another takeaway. All right. And thank you very much for tuning in. Yes. And your question was really great. And so then I think the last takeaway would be like, how do people do this? How do we, how can people help with the ordinance here in Penn Township specifically? And then if we're not in Penn Township, certainly this happens all over Pennsylvania. So let's talk about Penn Township first, and then we'll talk about what other folks can do.
Sure. So Protect PT is located in Penn Township. That's what the PT is, Penn Township. And we have proposed a new ordinance that we're going to ask the commissioners in Penn Township to enact. And so what you can do is call your commissioners, find out who the commissioner is that represents your particular location. Your particular location is where you live, where you reside. You don't have to own property to call a commissioner. A commissioner represents all the residents in an area, whether you're a renter or whether you're a property owner. So find out who is your commissioner in the place where you reside and call them and tell them that you understand that there is a new ordinance that is being proposed or will be proposed, and that you would like them to vote in favor of it. Talk to the commissioners about the things that we talked about here. Talk about the setbacks, the requirements for protecting the residents against noise, pollution, light pollution, air pollution, water pollution. having a 10-year plan for telling us, the residents, what the oil and gas company who was going to get a permit is going to do. Talk to them about all of those things. Go to a meeting. The commissioners are always at the meeting, and they're required to be at the meeting in order for it to have a quorum. And so they're there on a regular basis. Tell them that you would like to speak at the meeting, and don't be afraid. You have 3 minutes to do so. Get up and explain to the commissioners that you are a citizen. Tell them where you live, and tell them that you would like this ordinance to be enacted because you want more protection for yourself and for your community. And remember, if you are a property owner, these kinds of operations will negatively affect the value of your property. Nobody wants to buy a piece of land that is next to an industrial development if what they want to put there is a home or something like that. So it's in your financial best interest as well as your health best interest to see that these increased protections are put into place. Tell them that's what you want. That's what you want as citizens. That's what you want as residents. And just don't be afraid of it. Go up and speak.
And we have also, so the Penn Township commissioners, the next screen has listed. So if you do live in Penn Township, and I just want to clarify something really quick. So PT doesn't just stand for Penn Township, it does stand for Penn Trafford, because that's our school district. Sorry about that, Jim. I think it's because, this pollution doesn't know municipal lines. We might have these municipal lines that we work under, but which is why I think kind of going back to the state, right? The state is an important thing to push because that is going to cover all the municipalities throughout Pennsylvania. But certainly, these are the people in Penn Township that folks could contact. But I think if you're not in Penn Township, if you're in another municipality, talk to your local officials. We're happy to send you a copy of the stuff that we've put together. Jim has done a ton of research on what other ordinances say, and why we put them in the ordinance that he put together, and also from a perspective of can this be done? There's a lot of there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of issues with writing an ordinance. You have to make sure that it adheres to what's called the MPC, or the Municipal Planning Code. And so Jim has taken great care to make sure that the ordinance that we're proposing, adheres to that municipal planning code, as well as all the other laws that we've been talking about, with regard to oil and gas development. So we actually put up, so Emma put up in the chat the info@protectpt.org email. We've got the petition. So we're asking folks that, please come to the meeting. There's actually going to be a meeting on October 12th is the next meeting. So if you can come to that meeting, please do. We're going to talk to the commissioners at that point, and propose this new ordinance. You can also sign our petition online. If you're a Penn Township resident, you can go ahead and sign the petition, which is on your screen right now. And then so if you don't live in Penn Township, there are lots of folks that are willing to help you and support you, like the folks at Clean Air Council. There's a lot of other local organizations that work on ordinance work. So if you email us, we will definitely get you in contact with the right person that's doing work in your area, and try to help you as best as you can. So until we get that new state setback, pushed back to be more protective for folks, we really still want to push the local stuff and the local ordinances, because this is going to be protections now. So kind of just wrapping up, if you wouldn't mind just going to the last slide, Emma. So just wrapping up. So Andrew, do you have, kind of a main takeaway you could give for us before we hop off? And then Jim, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, I guess for me, the biggest one is, we got to fight for our health. And if we want to see changes at the state level, you got to talk to your reps. You got to get with people locally, and make your case as a community. And if at the state level, if what am I trying to say? We should take things on at both levels, right? Both at the state and locally. And I think if we organize where we are, uh, to fight for state increased setbacks as well as local ones, we have a better chance of protecting ourselves and our communities. So,
Great.
also, thanks for having me on. This was fun. And
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being on. And Jim, do you have a main takeaway from today?
Sure. I think it's similar to what Andrew had to say, and that is, it's really up to you. Your government is the government. We all get the government that we deserve, and your government is subject to what your demands are. And you should make the demand that the government protect you from these kinds of hazards. The other thing that I would say is that local ordinances are more than about setbacks. They're also about insurance, bonding, um, regulations that pertain specifically to the very, very specific needs of the local community. And so it's very important that you become involved in that.
Great. Yeah. And just to kind of, wrap it up here, I feel like, if the folks that you elect are not protecting you, maybe it's time to elect new folks, right? I think that's my main takeaway, that we deserve protection. We deserve protection for our own rights, for our property rights, for our health. And if the people that are elected to do that are not going to do that, then we should use our voice and our power to elect somebody that will. So, I think voting in upcoming elections is important, and just staying up to date with the local issues that are important to you. And if you live near this infrastructure and are impacted from it, then that's definitely an issue that is on your list. So definitely don't be afraid to go to your elected officials and find out where they stand on this issue, and tell them where you stand. And talk to folks that are running for office and find out where they stand. And so we're going to keep doing the work that we do on a daily basis to try to help and support folks that are dealing with these issues, pushing the state setback requirements, pushing the local setback requirements. And in the meantime, if we all work together, we can hopefully make some really great changes. So I want to thank again Andrew for coming on today and talking about the state setback campaign. And I want to thank Jim for all your hard work that you put into our local ordinance. And we're going to be moving on next month. We're actually, which is October 25th, is our next Lunch and Learn. We're going to be having Leanne Hill from PSC Healthy Energy talk about this new oil and gas map tool that's coming out. So definitely stay tuned for that. Follow us on our socials, and share this video with your friends. It's on YouTube to be super accessible to everyone, and make sure that everyone, if you're not on Facebook or if you're not on Twitter, you can still listen and learn to what we have to talk about. So definitely look back at other Lunch and Learns. Maybe check out that Nerdle one. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jim. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.